Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we don the linguistic safety gear and, well, dive into the mechanics of everyday life. Today, we aren't just reading between the lines.
No, today we are decoding the very structure of the spoken word, the sound of it.
Exactly. Our mission today is, I think, really laser-focused. We're trying to bridge this massive gulf between the English you see written in a textbook or a dictionary.
And the English you actually hear spoken by a fluent person on the street.
Yes. If you've ever felt that conversation is just moving too fast, we're going to argue that it's not really about speed.
Right. It's about the invisible changes that happen at the boundaries of every single word.
Yeah.
The linking, the deleting, the morphing of sounds.
And we really want to equip you with the essential knowledge, the linguistic engineering, if you will, to stop feeling so overwhelmed and start actually recognizing words as they naturally occur in a fluid stream.
And this isn't just about comprehension, is it? It's about being able to listen in a totally new way, almost like a native speaker does, without even thinking about it.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we've brought in a pretty exceptional stack of sources.
We've got some dense linguistic research on connected speech phenomena, sophisticated phonology data that details exactly where and why these sounds change.
We've also got some corpus-based analysis of conversational markers, words like kinda and sorta.
And we've even waded into the very lively debate among language learners about whether it's even possible to achieve what people call native-like fluency.
And I think we have to tackle the core paradox right at the start. Linguists have a term for it, right? The difference between the citation form.
Right, the citation form. That's the idealized, perfect pronunciation you'd find next to a word in the dictionary.
And the normal spoken form, which is how it actually sounds when it comes out of someone's mouth.
And the changes that turn one into the other, linking, deleting, adding, changing sounds, these are absolutely central to natural speech.
This is such a critical point for any learner because I think a lot of people assume that these phonetic shifts are a sign of, sloppy English or improper English.
That couldn't be further from the truth. These are automatic, completely natural features of speaking that happen in every single language. And crucially, they persist even in the most formal registers of English.
That's a powerful point. If you were to speak English without these natural adaptations, you would sound
mechanical.
Entirely mechanical.
There's the mechanical, actually. You might sound pathologically abnormal. I mean, the complete absence of connected speech features is so unnatural to human communication that it is, in some contexts, used as a subtle diagnostic tool for certain neurodegenerative or motor speech disorders.
Wow.
It is truly that fundamental to fluent human articulation.
So let's unpack this engine. Let's see what drives this fundamental process. We're talking about connected speech or CS. What does that actually look like at a physical level?
Well, at a physical level, connected speech means that when we speak naturally, our vocal apparatus, our tongue, our lips, our jaw, it moves continuously from the position for one sound directly to the position for the next. It doesn't care about word boundaries.
So there are no measurable pauses or breaks between words?
None. If you were to look at a sound wave of a phrase like walk on, you'd see the final K sound of walk and the initial vowel of on just merge seamlessly. There's no gap.
I see. So the words aren't just put next to each other like beads on a string. They are actively welded together.
Exactly. Welded is a great word for it. This allows the final sounds of one word to attach seamlessly to the beginning sounds of the next. And the reason we do this is, it's all about efficiency.
The body is lazy.
The human body, when speaking, is inherently lazy.
Yes.
It seeks the path of least resistance. It wants to minimize the muscular effort required to move everything around in your mouth.
So what determines which sounds get minimized or deleted or changed? I think you said it all comes back to the rhythm of English.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
English is traditionally classified as a stress-timed language. And what this means is that the language relies on a predictable rhythm, a beat that's generated by the regular spacing of the stressed syllables.
So you can think of it like a drummer keeping a steady beat. And the stressed syllables are those beats.
Precisely. And the unstressed elements are everything that has to be scrunched or compressed in between those beats.
So the core difference between a stressed syllable and an unstressed syllable, that's the fundamental driver of almost all of these processes.
It really is. Stressed syllables are louder, they're longer in duration, and they're much more carefully articulated. Unstressed syllables, on the other hand, are shorter, weaker, and honestly, they're often articulated almost carelessly.
Which makes them highly vulnerable to reduction, deletion, all these changes.
Exactly. That compression creates that familiar rhythmic cadence of English. And if you compare that to, say, a language like Spanish or French,
which are often called syllable-timed languages.
right, the difference in phonetic priority is immense.
Hmm.
In those languages, every syllable tends to get roughly the same amount of time, which gives the speech a more sort of machine gun even pace.
But in English, that rhythm is dominated by the stressed element. So you could have this huge mass of unstressed syllables that have to be compressed into a tiny window of time between two stressed points.
Right. But the research does caution us against oversimplifying this stress timing concept. It's not that all unstressed syllables take the exact same amount of time, no matter how many there are.
That's a necessary nuance.
It is. While the stressed syllables do maintain their duration, their rhythmic beat, piling on more unstressed elements does slightly increase the total time of the segment.
But they're still pronounced far more quickly and with much less clarity than their stressed neighbors.
Exactly. Which preserves the perception of a regular stress-based rhythm. That distinction is key.
Okay, let's look at the classic example from the source material that really illustrates the power of this compression. It's comparing birds eat worms with the birds will have eaten some of the worms.
Okay, so in the first sentence, all three words are stressed. Birds eat worms.
Uh-huh.
They take a certain amount of time to say.
Right, the three beats.
The three beats. Now, in the second sentence, the core semantic words, birds, eaten, and worms, they have to maintain that same rhythmic space. But now you've added 7 unstressed words.
7. The will have some of, and the second, the.
And all 7 of those words have to be crammed into the negative space between the beats. This results in mass deletion and reduction.
So will have eaten becomes.
Will have eaten.
And some of the becomes.
Some of the compression forces sounds to be deleted and full vowels to reduce down to that lazy schwa sound, all in service of maintaining that perceived regular rhythm. It's a physical necessity.
So if this is the engine, the stress and the rhythm, we need to categorize the specific mechanical shifts that are happening across these word boundaries.
Right. We can break them down into, let's say, 4 essential categories that we can explore. First is linking, which is the fundamental way words connect.
Okay.
Second is deletion or elision, where sounds just disappear entirely.
And modification.
Modification, where sounds adapt to their neighbors. And finally, reduction, where unstressed vowels weaken into simpler forms.
Okay, let's start with linking. This seems like the most straightforward mechanical process. You're just joining one word to the next.
It is, and it's the foundation of all fluidity in speech. Linking ensures that continuous flow of sound and eliminates those disruptive breaks, which are, acoustically distracting for a listener.
And the most common form in English is consonant-to-vowel linking, or CV linking.
It's the most robust form. The idea is simple. If a word ends in a consonant and the next word starts with a vowel, that consonant effectively jumps the boundary.
It doesn't just jump, though. The sources say it gets reassigned to the start of the next syllable.
That's a much better way to put it. The process is called resyllabification. And this is why words that begin with a written vowel, like is or over, often sound like they begin with a consonant when they're in a sentence.
Let's use that vivid example again. The bike is stolen.
Okay, so the final K sound of bike is reassigned. It becomes the onset of the syllable is. The resulting pronunciation is the bike is stolen.
The bike is stolen.
Or take walk on. The K is reassigned, making it sound like walk on. Fall apart becomes folly part.
I often hear learners struggling with a phrase like keep up. They hear keep up and their brain tries to map pup onto a familiar word.
Right, they're looking for the word pup, but they don't realize it's just the result of the P crossing the boundary. And that realization that consonants can belong to the following vowel sound, that's a huge key to unlocking listening comprehension.
Now, resyllabification gets even more complex when we look at consonant clusters, right?
It does. You mentioned first aid earlier, which becomes first aid.
It's a perfect illustration.
It is. The S and the T in first form a cluster. When the word aid follows, that final T is just siphoned off to start the new syllable.
Or say day.
This is the mechanism that allows for certain kinds of, linguistic humor.
The classic example being ice cream versus ice cream.
Yes. In ice cream, the S of ice resyllabifies to join cream, creating the sound ice cream. If you just break the word boundary and say ice scream, the sounds are nearly identical.
It really demonstrates how effortlessly this reassignment of final consonants occurs.
It's completely automatic. Okay, so now what about the meaning of two vowels? Vowel-to-vowel linking. You can't just let those two vowel sounds clash, because there'll be a noticeable break, a hiatus.
So we insert a subtle sound to bridge the gap.
That subtle sound is a glide, which is essentially semi-vowel. It acts as a transitional sound, ensuring smooth movement between the two open vowel positions. And the choice of which glide you use depends entirely on the position of the preceding vowel.
Okay, so if the word ends in a high front vowel, the vowel where your tongue is near the front of your mouth, like in the word see or he.
Then the human tongue naturally forms the palatal glide, which is the J sound, the Y sound.
Ah,
So it becomes, yeah, yes, it becomes he, yes. The glide is just a minimal extension of that preceding vowel sound.
and if the word ends in a high back vowel where your tongue is near the back, like in go or do.
Then you insert the labiovelar glide, the W sound. Your lips are already rounded for that back vowel, so the minimal effort transition is the W glide. Go about is pronounced with a W connecting the two vowels. G-O-W, bait.
It's all about continuous flow and minimizing friction.
Exactly. It's the laziest, most efficient way to get from one sound to the next.
Okay, now we move to the processes where sounds vanish entirely. Deletion or elision.
Right, and this is often used to simplify really dense consonant clusters, particularly those that form along word boundaries.
It seems counterintuitive that we would just delete sounds, but it's extremely common. Why is it always the final consonants that are deleted and never the initial ones?
That's a crucial insight. Initial consonants, the onset of a syllable, are absolutely vital for word recognition. They give a listener the first burst of acoustic information they need to identify the word.
So if a sound is going to be deleted to save energy,
It's almost always going to be at the end of a syllable or in the middle of a consonant cluster where the sound is kind of redundant or just difficult to articulate in quick succession.
can you give us a concrete example of this consonant cluster simplification?
Sure. The alveolar stops, T and D, they're highly prone to deletion in the middle of three consonant clusters. So think about the phrase, I must be going.
I must be going. Okay.
The T in must is often deleted because it sits between the S of must and the B of be. The cluster STB is just simplified to SB. I must be going.
And the same mechanism applies to handout, doesn't it? The D in hand is often deleted.
Yes, exactly. It makes it hand out. In fact, if the T or D occurs at the end of a word and is followed by another consonant, its deletion rate is very, very high. Next door often loses the T, becoming next door.
It just makes it so much easier to articulate quickly.
So much easier. Now, a very specific high-frequency deletion process is H dropping.
Right, the H sound.
The H sound is, phonetically speaking, very weakly articulated. It's just breath flowing through your open glottis. It requires almost no effort, but because it's so weak, it's highly prone to deletion, especially when it occurs at the beginning of an unstressed function word.
So we're talking about pronouns like he, him, his, her, and the auxiliary verb have.
Correct. And the historical insight here is fascinating.
Yeah.
The modern pronoun is actually believed to be the result of H dropping from an older form, which was hit.
Oh, that's interesting.
You can see this deletion in contractions, of course, where shoulda becomes shoulda pronounced should've. But even in non-contracted speech, a phrase like give him the book often becomes give em the book. The H just vanishes.
What's interesting, though, is the social dimension of this. While deleting H in unstressed function words is standard in pretty much all English registers, if that deletion happens in stressed words like pronouncing house as ouse, that carries a very strong social and dialectal marker.
That's a key distinction. The regular deletion in function words is universal fluency. But the systematic, visible replacement of the letter H with an apostrophe in non-contractions, like in Aries right air, is strongly associated with, say, urban, working-class British accents. It distinguishes it from standard, formal speech.
So it moves the process from just a phonetic efficiency mechanism to a sociolinguistic identity marker.
Precisely.
Okay, moving on to modification. This is where sounds don't disappear, but they change entirely. They adapt to their environment to create smoother, more fluid articulation.
Yes, and native speakers are usually completely unconscious of these shifts. We are just adapting the sound to minimize the physical movement required for the tongue or the vocal cords. Let's start with a major form of modification in English, glottalization.
Glottalization involves the glottal stop, the sound, that sharp momentary silence you hear when you say, uh-oh. It's caused by the vocal cords snapping shut briefly.
Exactly. And in connected speech, the glottal stop often replaces or sometimes reinforces the articulation of a stop consonant, particularly T or D. It happens most frequently in consonant-to-consonant linking.
So the first consonant isn't fully released?
Right. Instead, the glottis closes quickly to stop the air, and this dramatically reduces the vocal effort needed compared to a full alveolar closure and release.
So if I say get by, instead of fully pronouncing the T and then preparing for the B, the T is replaced by that stop, making it sound like G by.
That's a very common example, and is especially common when the consonant involved is a stop consonant like P, T, K, D, G, B. We often glottalize takedown, turning the K into a glottal stop before the D, resulting in tay down.
And the glottal stop is also key to how we pronounce T within words, like button or kitten.
Right, where the chi is often followed by a syllabic N. The glottal stop reinforces the preceding vowel before you get to that nasal consonant.
Okay. Now, perhaps the most recognizable marker of North American English.
Flapping. Flapping, yes. This is the process where the alveolar consonants T or D soften dramatically. When they appear between two vowels, or between a vowel and a syllabic L, they become a very quick, light contact of the tongue against the alveolar ridge. This is the alveolar flap, written as Carrillo.
It's similar to a quick Spanish single R, but not quite the same.
Not exactly. But crucially, this isn't a substitution that only happens in careless or informal speech. It happens in all registers of North American English.
Let's listen to the high-speed reduction on a phrase like a lot of.
A lot of becomes of. Gotta go often speeds up to go. Put it on becomes pu or yadin. This fluidity is why phrases that are grammatically simple can sound like a single, unrecognizable word to a listener who's only expecting the citation forms.
But wait, if two and D both become the same sound, this flap, how do American listeners distinguish between minimal pairs that are otherwise identical? Words like metal and metal.
That is a brilliant question, and it highlights the hidden complexity here. While the T and D do merge into the flap, the distinction is usually preserved by the vowel length that comes just before the flap.
Okay.
Vowels before a voiced consonant like D are typically longer than vowels before a voiceless consonant like T. So, when a native speaker hears the flap in metal versus metal, the slight difference in the duration of the E vowel before the flap allows them to differentiate the meaning.
That's a fascinating micro-adjustment. Wow. Okay, let's move to assimilation. This is the mechanism where one sound takes on the phonetic characteristics of its neighbor.
Assimilation is entirely about minimizing movement. If your tongue has to be in position A for the first sound, and then all the way over in position Z for the second, the articulation effort is really high. Assimilation pushes A and Z closer together, often by changing the place of articulation.
Let's talk about that specific type of assimilation, palatalization, sometimes called yod coalescence.
This happens when certain alveolar consonant sounds, made with the tongue near the ridge behind your teeth, meet the glide J, which is the Y sound. They physically merge into a new single sound known as an affricate or a fricative.
An affricate, that's a sound that starts with the complete closure of the airflow, like a stop, but ends with a gradual release of friction, like a fricative.
Exactly. So when the alveolar stop meets the glide J, for example, in the phrase would you, they blend together into the voiced palatal affricate D, the J sound.
Yeah, would you help me? Comes would or help me.
Do ya help me? Exactly.
Yeah.
And when the alveolar stop T meets J, like in...
What are you? It merges into the voiceless palatal affricate T, the J sound.
Right. So what are you thinking? Becomes what are thinking. Recognizing that cha is actually what you seen off is absolutely non-negotiable for understanding rapid, fluent speech.
And assimilation goes beyond just palatalization. What about this concept of death?
That phrase refers to a common assimilation involving the voiced interdental fricative, that's the sound in high-frequency function words like the and then. When it's preceded by an alveolar consonant, the place of articulation often shifts. For instance, when in meets the alveolar N sound often causes the sound in the arella to lose its interdental friction and become an alveolar stop D, or even another N.
So in that becomes
and then becomes an N.
Wow. So we've covered sounds moving, sounds deleting, sounds changing their place of articulation. This is a microscopic dance that's happening in the mouth constantly.
And the final major category, which is arguably the most pervasive of all, is reduction. This is the predictable consequence of English's stress-time nature, and it's characterized by the weakening of vowels.
The moment a syllable is unstressed, its vowel is at risk of turning into the legendary schwa.
The schwa is the linguistic default vowel. It's the minimum effort sound. It's the vowel produced when your tongue is completely relaxed and central in your mouth.
So when a syllable loses its stress, its distinct vowel color, like the bright I or the rounded O, it's just lost.
It defaults to the colorless schwa. And the most significant examples of this are what we call the weak forms.
These are those high-frequency, one-syllable function words prepositions like for, to, from, articles like the, conjunctions, auxiliaries.
Right. Because they carry grammatical meaning, but rarely the main semantic load. They are almost never stressed in natural speech.
Let's run through a few of the most important weak forms that you really need to internalize.
Okay. The strong form of to is to, but its weak form is to. The word for is for, strongly, but often for, or just for weakly. R is R strongly, but it reduces to ro or even a syllabic ro weakly.
And the conjunction and.
And strongly it's and, but it reduces to an or even just the syllabic nay. You hear this in phrases like fish and chips.
And the problem for learners is that when these weak forms collide with all the other processes we've discussed, linking, deletion, assimilation, they become completely opaque.
They do. Take a common phrase like because I have got to go. The unstressed vowels in, because, and have reduced to schwa. Got to undergoes reduction and often flapping, becoming gotta.
So the whole phrase streamlines into something like, 'cause I gotta go.
Exactly. The original 5 separate words are almost unidentifiable to someone who was only trained in those perfect citation forms.
And these reductions are old, accepted parts of the language. I mean, the sources show the reduction of going to gona is attested as far back as 1806, and want to wanna since 1896. This is not a modern fad.
No, not at all. These are deeply baked into the structure of rapid English. One linguist aptly described listening to dense connected speech as jungle listening.
Jungle listening, I like that.
It's a continuous overlapping mass of sounds, glottal stops, reductions, links, and the listener has to rapidly parse a single stream, not discrete words, recognizing that fluid reality is the first step toward true fluency.
That concept of phonetic reduction is actually the perfect bridge to our next section. We've talked about how function words shrink, but what about words that are inserted not for grammar, but for social function? I'm talking about discourse markers.
Yes, discourse markers, words or short phrases like, kind of, sort of. They are absolutely central to natural colloquial speech.
And crucially, their most popular forms, kinda and sorta, are direct products of the very reduction rules we just explored.
That's the link. Because they're conversationally important, but they carry very little semantic weight, they're almost always unstressed. And this forces their vowels to reduce to the schwa, just like a preposition or an article would.
So the phonetic reduction of kind of to kinda is a consequence of the weak form of the V, or so following an unstressed duration.
Yes, it links the physical mechanics of speech directly to the pragmatic function of what's being said.
It's really astonishing that these markers are often just omitted or even explicitly corrected out of language textbooks, given how pervasive they are.
It is. But the appropriate use of these markers is highly correlated with confident, fluent second language proficiency. They're more than just fillers.
They function as critical pragmatic cues.
Right. They guide the hearer's interpretation, and they signal the speaker's attitude toward the content. They manage the flow of the conversation and the social relationship between the people talking.
Okay, let's focus on the corpus-based research comparing kind of and sort of. The data shows a really fascinating regional preference in English.
It does. The analysis of the corpus of contemporary American English, or COSIE, revealed that in spoken American English, the marker kind of is overwhelmingly preferred.
What were the numbers?
It had a raw frequency of over 80,000 instances compared to about 40,000 for sort of. So American speakers are twice as likely to use kind of.
But when the researchers crossed the Atlantic and looked at the British National Corpus, the BNC,
the preference slips completely. British English speakers use sort of approximately 4.2 times more frequently than kind of.
Wow. That really highlights that fluency isn't just about grammar, it's about these subtle, acquired sociolinguistic preferences that signal a regional identity. Even your choice of conversational lubricant matters.
It does. And we should note that while both reduced forms kinda and sorta exist, sorta was significantly rarer in the spoken American corpus than kinda.
Which just reinforces that overwhelming American preference.
Exactly. So let's look at the 4 crucial functions that these markers serve, because this is where the real nuance lies.
Okay, so the overarching function is that of a softener or a downtuner.
Right. They act as hedges. They reduce the semantic value or the intensity of the word or phrase they modify. And this is a key social function. It lessens the speaker's commitment to the absolute truth or certainty of their statement.
Which is essential for polite discourse.
Absolutely. So if they modify an adjective, they're hedging. Instead of saying, the job is impossible, a speaker might soften that claim with, it's kind of hard to understand. It kind of modifies the adjective hard, reducing its intensity.
And it works the same way with adverbs.
It does. I was kind of really taken aback with all the attention. You're hedging the strength of your feeling.
Okay, the second function happens when they modify a verb, acting as an approximator or an adjuster.
Here, they compromise the meaning of the action. The speaker uses the marker to approximate what they intended to say, rather than defining it strictly. And the corpus showed these markers overwhelmingly modify the most common verbs. Get, go, have, be, look, like, take, make.
The example, you have to kind of have a good attitude, shows the speaker adjusting the requirement of the verb have to something, well, looser.
Right. It suggests it's more of a guideline than a strict rule. And that kind of conversational nuance where the meaning is suggested, not mandated, that's the hallmark of native speech.
The third function relates directly to social comfort, face threat mitigation.
This is a complex sociolinguistic concept. Face refers to the public image and self-esteem we all try to maintain during an interaction. To threaten someone's face is to impose on them or contradict them too strongly.
So discourse markers mitigate this threat, especially when they precede a noun.
Precisely. In a debate, a participant might introduce a difficult topic by referring to some sort of problem that I'd been having, by using they're signaling that they don't want to sound aggressive or absolute about the term problem. They sound less imposing, more collaborative.
Makes the critique easier to swallow.
Much easier. And the final, most straightforward function is the delay device.
Buying time.
This is when the marker buys the speaker a brief moment of time to retrieve the correct word or plan the next phrase. If you listen carefully to natural conversation, you'll hear other markers like serving the same function.
But those are purely hesitation markers, right? They don't have the same mitigating function as kind of or sort of.
Exactly. So a speaker searching for the right descriptor might say the food was served with like some kind of a dipping sauce, a ranch dipping sauce. That kind of stalls the speech just long enough for them to retrieve the specific name, ranch.
And that leads to a fascinating syntactic preference. The corpus indicated that kind of is highly enacted to noun phrases. Phrases like kind of thing, kind of stuff, kind of person are immensely common in American English.
They are, whereas sort of, while it is also found before nouns sort of thing as its number one pairing, the overall analysis suggested that sort of has a stronger propensity for preceding a verb phrase compared to kind of.
These subtle preferences just further reinforce the regional and social coding of these tiny yet incredibly powerful linguistic tools.
Understanding these markers is essential for moving beyond textbook fluency. It demonstrates that fluency isn't just about avoiding mistakes. It's about mastering the socially acceptable ways of being vague or hesitating.
All of this microscopic, phonetic, and pragmatic detail really points us toward the ultimate goal for any dedicated learner. Is it truly possible to achieve native-like fluency?
That's the big question, isn't it? And our sources show a very lively debate on this. Native-like fluency is usually defined as the ability to express oneself comfortably without the telltale signs of a foreigner.
And that encompasses pronunciation, idiomatic usage, cultural context. It goes far beyond simple grammatical correctness.
It does. And some argue it's an impossible barrier to cross once your brain's language acquisition window has closed and your native language framework is sort of set in stone.
But the linguistic reality is that while it is very challenging, it is absolutely possible.
It is. We see numerous examples of non-native English speakers who achieve truly exceptional levels. And often, this is achieved without ever setting foot in an English-speaking country.
Which is largely due to the sheer volume of high-quality English media content that's available globally now, and I suppose early consistent exposure in school.
Right. Yet, reaching that truly indistinguishable level where a listener would never even suspect you were an L2 speaker, that seems to require a level of dedication that goes way beyond weekly classes.
It requires total, sustained immersion.
That's the key. We're talking about removing your native language from your life as much as is practically possible for a significant period of time, say 5 or more years of living and operating entirely in the target country.
And when we say immersion, we mean applying the language to every single aspect of your daily life baking, reading dense news articles, negotiating your bills, watching high-speed entertainment, writing formal documents.
All of it. This level of exposure demands tens of thousands of hours and often 10 or more years of cumulative intensive practice.
And the reason for this huge time commitment is that what separates the merely fluent from the native-like speaker is often not the mastery of complex grammar, which can be taught. It's the mastery of the unteachable elements.
That's it. It's the vast reservoir of contextual and cultural subtexts.
What specifically defines those gaps?
Well, it's the subtle shared cultural knowledge that you acquire organically over a lifetime. Think about idioms whose origin is culturally specific, or references to things that every 10-year-old in that culture knows.
Like understanding a passing reference to "May the force be with you," or a quote from an old American cartoon.
Or knowing the precise cultural connotation of a phrase like throwing shade versus just a simple literal translation of the words. These cultural milestones, these jokes, these historical references, they solidify in the brain of someone who grew up hearing them.
But they represent immense gaps for an adult learner, no matter how brilliant their vocabulary is.
Absolutely. Another factor is the mastery of social registers. A truly native-like speaker can code switch instantly. They understand how to use the language differently in a formal corporate boardroom versus, using highly informal abbreviated language on the street or when texting a friend.
And mastering those registers includes understanding and occasionally utilizing the characteristic mistakes or non-standard pronunciations that native speakers themselves use in informal settings.
Right. No textbook teaches you how to sound naturally sloppy in the right way.
That's a good way to put it. That ability to switch registers is crucial because it demonstrates not just language skill, but social acuity.
It does. And of course, the final hurdle, the one that often persists even when everything else is perfect, is the accent.
The accent is the most stubborn feature, isn't it? It's deeply rooted in the muscle memory you developed in childhood.
It is. Many L2 speakers achieve exceptional linguistic performance, but the subtle intonation, the rhythm, the pronunciation, it still marks them as non-native.
However, some learners do manage to lose their accent entirely. What are the key techniques for that kind of phonetic breakthrough?
Intensive imitation and heavy media consumption are often cited as the keys. The technique known as shadowing, where the learner immediately repeats the audio they hear, matching the rhythm, the intonation, the speed. It forces the mouth and tongue muscles to adopt the new configurations necessary for native sounds.
It overrides the habits established by the first language.
It does, but it requires immense focused effort.
But the linguist's perspective is quite clear on cautioning us against fixating on this concept of native status itself.
It's a problematic term because native merely describes where you acquired the language first, not necessarily your skill level.
That's a great point.
There are plenty of native English speakers with low vocabulary, limited literacy, or regional accents so thick that they're mutually incomprehensible to other native speakers.
So that really shifts the paradigm. Fluency, therefore, should be measured not by this unattainable status of native identity, but by the functional ability to communicate complex ideas accurately, to navigate various social registers, and, most importantly, to understand the deep nuances of connected speech.
It's an empowering thought. The goal isn't to be born again in an English-speaking country. The goal is to master the system.
This has been an incredibly detailed journey. We started with the basic physics of sound and discovered that the constant push for efficiency, driven by English's stress-timed rhythm, results in words being physically fused together.
We did. We unpacked the microscopic mechanics. How linking reassigned consonants across word boundaries, how sounds like 8 vanish entirely in dense clusters, and how modification processes like glottal stops and alveolar flaps transform the landscape of spoken English.
And we saw how these phonetic realities link directly to social and pragmatic functions. The very rules that make the word of shrink to a schwa are the same rules that allow essential social tools like to function as a hedge.
Softening potential threats and making our communication more collaborative and nuanced. And we concluded by recognizing that true, indistinguishable fluency requires mastery of this entire ecosystem, from the speed of a flact to the appropriate use of an idiom.
Bridging the gap between dictionary perfection and real-world cultural context.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting, connecting back to the idea that sometimes the density of connected speech can even confuse native speakers. This takes us to the concepts of mondegreens and puns.
Mondegreens are those hilarious phonetic mishearings, often in song lyrics, where a listener's brain tries to make sense of a continuous rapid stream of sound by mapping it onto familiar words, even if they make no logical sense in context.
The famous one is hearing Lady Mondegreen instead of the original linked phrase, laid him on the green.
Exactly. The density of the sounds in the original phrase just allowed the auditory illusion to take hold.
Another classic mishearing relies on the same phonetic confusion. If you hear someone mention the good old days, a listener might mistake that highly reduced and linked phrase.
For the good old aids, the acoustic slipperiness, the reduction of old, and the deletion and reduction of is what makes that mishearing possible.
And connected speech is also the fertile ground for puns. Puns rely entirely on the fact that two completely different phrases, when spoken fluently, can sound almost identical.
Exactly. When someone jokes that a clock always runs out of time because it is secondhand, the humor relies on the phonetic similarity of secondhand, meaning used, and the linked phrase second, the unit of time hand, the moving pointer.
Or the classic joke relying on resyllabification, I saw a sandwich versus I saw a sandwich.
It's perfect. The slipperiness of spoken language, created by the very rules we discussed today, is not just a barrier for learners, it's a source of immense creativity, humor, and social bonding, even for those who grew up immersed in it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who is now armed with this very detailed knowledge?
Your call to further exploration is this. The next time you listen to a rapid, fluid conversation, don't just feel defeated. Instead, use this knowledge as an analytical tool.
Listen actively for the deletion. Listen for the glottal stop.
Ask yourself, is the word I think I'm hearing actually a common modification process like T and Y turning into Crygen get you?
The goal is to move from passive hearing to active analytical listening. Once you recognize that the flap, the glide, and the schwa are mandatory features of English, not mistakes, you will unlock your listening comprehension and start decoding the language in real time.
Just like a native speaker.
Go out there and start listening for the subtle differences between winter and winter. You won't be able to unhear them.
Happy diving.